When I lifted my face from the laptop I was working on at the dinner table, a sharp pain shot through my neck. My skin instantly became hot, as if someone had applied a red-hot iron to it. I screamed and turned around, and my mother-in-law appeared in front of me, holding a hair iron in her hands. Her mocking gaze was full of malice, and her lips curved in a contemptuous smile. "It's buzzing, so even a parasite like you can feel the warmth," she said with icy mockery. I was stunned and couldn't immediately figure out what was going on. I remembered her saying that she was going to go to the bathroom, and I couldn't imagine for a moment that she would come back with an iron to attack me. She came closer, as if enjoying the moment, and pressed the iron against my neck even harder. "I'm just checking how thick-skinned you are," she added with eerie calm. "You're useless, but you live such a luxurious life." I could feel the anger slowly building up in me, throbbing along with the pain in my neck. "But I work a lot," I began quietly, unable to hide my confusion and resentment. "Why are you treating me so terribly? Are you saying that staying at home and being lazy is not a job? I work from morning to night to maintain this house. Are you working?" Her voice was laced with sarcasm. "Are you working on a computer? It's just a game. Real work is what people like me do. Stop stealing from us." I tried not to scream. She and my husband were real parasites, sucking all the strength out of me. I was the one who paid $5,000 for rent, covered all expenses, provided for them, and in return they raised mountains of accusations against me. Why did I have to put up with this? Why was I considered obliged to suffer without receiving even a drop of respect in return? "Have you reached the limit?" she asked defiantly, pressing the iron even harder. My neck was burning, and I realized that this was the last moment I could let them treat me like this. "Leave this house immediately," I said through clenched teeth. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. I knew that this phrase would change everything. "Do you really want me to leave?" the mother-in-law pretended to be surprised. "Once I leave, I'll never come back. Do you understand that?" "Yes," I replied, trying to remain calm despite the storm of emotions raging in my chest. "I never want to take care of a man like you again." These words sounded like liberation. Tears of despair mixed with pain, but I felt the power that had been suppressed earlier begin to emerge inside me. I packed my things, trying not to look back, and left the house that was no longer mine forever. "My name is Kelly, I'm 35 years old. It's been 2 years since I got married." "Hey, isn't that Kelly?" "It's been a long time," a voice called out to me. I turned around and saw Ben, the man I would later associate my life with, but then he was just an acquaintance, a student 2 years younger than me. Ben has always been the soul of any party. His bright, energetic character attracted everyone around him. Confident, he made decisions easily, and because of this, he was surrounded by people inspired by his laid-back charisma. After graduating from college, Ben got a job at a well-known foreign company, and his career took off. During our university years, we did not communicate much, our circles of interests did not overlap, but on the day we met by chance, the conversation unexpectedly dragged on. Perhaps we were attracted by the difference in characters. I was always more restrained and cautious, while he seemed to rush into life as if into a stormy stream. Our communication turned out to be surprisingly easy and natural, and with each new meeting, the conversation continued as if we had known each other for years. We started dating, everything developed organically, without tension. One day Ben shared his dreams with me. "Hey, I really like fashion accessories from abroad. I dream of opening a boutique where only my favorite things would be sold." He has already started preparing for this by collecting a collection and studying the market. It was interesting for me to listen to him. His mature mind was combined with a childish passion for new discoveries, and his enthusiasm was transmitted to me. Even a reserved person like me couldn't help but feel inspired by his stories. We got married a year later. Everything seemed perfect until the turning point happened. my father-in-law passed away suddenly. This death shocked the whole family. Ben lowered his eyes and said softly, "Kelly, could you stay with my mom for a while? She finds it difficult to come to terms with the loss of her father, and she wants to stay in the luxurious apartment they rented. The lease doesn't expire until a year later, but she can't handle the payment on her own." I understood that at this moment it was necessary to support his mother, and therefore I agreed without hesitation. "Of course, don't worry. I'll help with the living expenses until the inheritance comes." We moved into this apartment. And although I wasn't interested in fashion or luxury items, I was intrigued by what the interior of such a place looked like. However, at that time I underestimated the difficulties it would involve. From the very beginning, my mother-in-law did not hide her attitude towards me. She openly despised me, believing that her son deserved better. Even at our wedding, she said disapprovingly, "Of all the women, did Ben choose the one who is older than him? How did this happen? You just seduced him." At that moment, it seemed that her words were only the result of bitterness, and my father-in-law intervened to calm the situation. But after his death, that changed. Living under the same roof with her, I became the target of constant minor reproaches. "Kelly, even if you're at home, stop dressing so casually. Do you understand where you are? This is an elite house. Wear something decent, jeans are unacceptable here. Wear a skirt, at least do your makeup before breakfast." I tried to please, but her nagging became more and more sophisticated. One evening she looked at the dish I had prepared and said with undisguised contempt, "Did you buy the ingredients at that regular store? How can you cook something delicious from the products from there? In this house, we only buy food from an expensive supermarket." My attempts to find a common language with her were smashed against a wall of hostility. I resigned myself, silently fulfilling her demands, hoping that over time she would change her mind about me, but every day seemed like a new challenge. "Mary, it's just a simple salad. Ben likes it, so I do it a lot." But yes, I tried to smooth over the tension by adding, "This supermarket is really expensive." The mother-in-law sighed as if she didn't like the air either. Shaking her head deeply in disappointment, she hissed, "My God, what an awkward act. You're a disgrace to our family. You never know who might be watching." Her words sent a painful prick through me, like small but sharp needles that dug deeper every day. At that moment, I made a firm promise to myself. I would do everything possible to win her recognition. I've been working hard on myself, from taking care of my appearance to improving my culinary skills. I tirelessly tried to please her, trying to be perfect in her eyes. However, no matter how hard I tried, her critical gaze remained cold and her words were cruel. At first, I took her sarcasm and reproaches lightly, hoping that it was temporary and that she would soften over time. But the longer I lived in this house, the more I felt crushed. I was losing strength, falling into a state of despair and powerlessness. I dreamed of sharing my experiences with Ben, but our life together has changed. We used to enjoy our time together every day, but since we moved into his mother's house, our meetings have become rare. He kept saying the same thing, "I'm sorry, I was very busy at work." His tired voice made me feel like I had no right to complain. However, I knew in my heart that I had my limits. At some point, I couldn't hold back my feelings anymore and decided I had to talk to him. "Ben, I have a lot to talk about," I began, trying to find the right words. He looked at me carefully and then, as if he hadn't heard my words, interrupted, "Kelly, I have important news too. I quit my job 3 months ago." I froze in place, not believing my ears. "What? Quit? How did this happen?" "Don't worry, I've already found something else to do," he hastened to reassure me. "Do you remember my long-standing plan to open a fashion accessories store? I finally launched it, and now I'm running it with Eric." Eric, that name was familiar to me. He was almost a legend at the university, His charisma and leadership qualities were admired by everyone. He not only developed and sold a successful gaming application, but also launched startups that became famous in certain circles. Now that Ben has told me that he is cooperating with him, I realize that my husband is really serious. And you didn't tell me anything? Surprise grew in me. Ben, although he spoke in his usual gentle tone, looked a little guilty. I didn't want to worry you, Kelly. You're supporting Mom right now, and I didn't want to add to your worries. But now, I need your help. He looked at me with a pleading expression, and his next question caught me off guard. Could you take over the rent for this apartment? Ben stared earnestly into my eyes, waiting for an answer. What? The surprise in my voice was too obvious. But we already share the expenses with your mother. I know, he continued, but it's hard for me to cover all the expenses on my own right now. In addition, I spend a lot of money on advertising for the store, and this is necessary for its success. Please, Kelly, I'm only asking for a few months until the lease runs out. It has always been my dream to open the store, but it takes longer than I expected to make a profit. Mixed feelings overwhelmed me: anxiety, confusion, and, to some extent, a sense of responsibility for both of us. Ben looked so serious and passionate that it was hard for me to say no. Of course, I could afford to cover the rent with my income, and our savings provided some financial cushion. But most importantly, I couldn't forget the day I decided to marry him, when we shared our dreams and goals with each other. I knew that his aspirations were sincere. Okay, I finally replied, smiling slightly, but only until the lease expires. Thanks, Kelly, he said with relief. As for the store, I'll show you the website that we created. When I looked at his creation, I had to admit that he really put his whole heart into it. I tried my best to support Ben's business, but every month my financial obligations only grew. The amount I had to pay was gradually increasing. Now, in addition to managing our family budget, I also have the responsibility for my husband's financial support and even for my mother-in-law's allowance. It became my routine, but deep down I found myself thinking more and more often that the only thing I wanted now was for the lease to end as soon as possible. Kelly, could you put off working on the computer for a while and do the cleaning? My mother-in-law's voice sounded harsh, making me flinch. Since you're staying here, you should be more active in household chores. I quickly turned around and replied as calmly as possible, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mom. I'll start as soon as I finish this job." There are always too many excuses for your job, she said coldly, pursing her lips. Make it quick. We will have guests today, and after cleaning, please leave the house. I knew what that would mean. Every time she had guests, I had to leave the house, as if I was interfering with her perfect picture of life. I understood that my presence was undesirable for her and only increased her dislike of me. But at those moments, I was comforted at least by the thought that I could work anywhere with my laptop. It gave me at least some freedom. However, that day turned out to be different. When I returned home in the evening, my mother-in-law greeted me with a strange satisfaction on her face. There was a faint, triumphant smile in her eyes. "Your room is clean now," she said dryly. Confused, I rushed to my office. Everything looked neat, my things were organized, but there was a large suitcase and 2 gym bags in the center of the room. I froze. "Mom, what does this mean?" I asked, unable to hide my alarm. This room was originally intended for guests. She looked at me as if I was invading her personal space. "I can't leave it to you, because your housekeeping skills leave much to be desired. If you want to stay in this room, you'll have to pay the rent for it. If you can't, leave immediately. Don't expect to live here luxuriously and for free." My mother-in-law's words hit me like a thunderclap. I stood in silence, barely swallowing resentment and tears. Why should I suffer such humiliation? When I lowered my head, she, pleased with her superiority, said with obvious satisfaction. I will repeat it again. I do not accept you as Ben's wife. She snorted and, proudly raising her head, returned to the living room. Tears of despair and disappointment welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I tried to contact Ben, but he didn't answer my calls. It wasn't until late in the evening, when he finally replied to my messages, that I read his short reply, "Please be patient a little longer." These words did not comfort me. When Ben came home late at night, I couldn't contain my feelings and poured everything that had accumulated on him. "I can't take this anymore, Ben. I'm paying the full rent, and now your mother wants me to pay for my room." I couldn't hide my indignation. "This is unbearable." Ben nodded stiffly, realizing that the situation was getting out of control. "I'm sorry, Kelly. I'll talk to her. But please be patient a little longer. Once we move out of here, you won't have to see her anymore. I promise." He spoke with such sincerity that I couldn't help but believe him. These words eased my tension a little. The next day, Ben actually talked to his mother. We had breakfast together, and although my mother-in-law avoided sarcastic remarks, her silent displeasure hung in the air. When she finished breakfast and got up from the table, I went back to work on my laptop. Thoughts about the future were spinning in my head, about our possible departure from this house. But soon her voice interrupted my thoughts. "Are you leaving today?" She stood in the doorway, one eyebrow raised, as if putting me in front of a fact. My mother-in-law's words pierced me like a cold wind burning inside. I abruptly looked up from the computer, feeling a sharp pain in my neck. I instinctively screamed, "Oh, how hot it is!" Turning around, I saw her standing there with a cool grin, holding a hair iron in her hands. She slowly lowered it, clearly enjoying my confusion and suffering. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed, stunned by her action. "That's all," she replied calmly, as if it was something that was taken for granted. I put my hand to my neck, feeling a burning pain, and rushed to the refrigerator for a cooling bag. Memories surfaced in my head of how she used to go to the bathroom with an iron, and I realized that all this time she was just waiting for the moment to strike her a blow. "Oh, do you feel the heat too?" her mother-in-law said mockingly. Her voice was cold and cruel. "I wanted to see how thick-skinned you are, living such a luxurious life, but at the same time you remain useless. I work a lot too, but why would you do anything at your job if you just used it as an excuse to relax? You don't do anything except stay at home like you're unemployed. It's time for you to think about our situation and finally become independent." Her words cut into me like knives. I knew that I was actually bearing the main financial burden on our family, paying rent and housing costs, but I still couldn't understand why I was being treated so cruelly. Why was I humiliated for my own kindness and support? My gaze unconsciously became sharper as I silently stared at her, holding back tears and anger. "What kind of look is that?" Her eyes narrowed and her voice became even more icy. "Leave this house immediately, otherwise I do not know what I will do next." Her words cut into my soul like the final blow in a protracted battle. "Am I really allowed to leave?" I asked, hardly believing my ears. "I'm not coming back here anymore, do you know that?" "Yes, it's all right," she said indifferently, shrugging her shoulders. "I'm tired of taking care of poor people like you." Full of pain and disappointment, I packed my things, crying silent tears. My mother-in-law had already arranged my things the day before, so the process didn't take long. I exhaled, mentally saying goodbye to this house, which has never become a real refuge for me. At that moment, I didn't care what happened to this place, to these walls, which were the only witnesses to my humiliation. I left the house without looking back, as if I had escaped from prison. First, I went to the hospital to get treatment for a burn on my neck. After that, I went to my favorite cafe, trying to come to my senses. The spacious tables and quiet surroundings helped me calm down a bit and focus on my work. However, my thoughts kept returning to Ben. Should I contact him? Should I tell you about everything that happened? While I was trying to sort out my emotions, a familiar silhouette suddenly approached me. Kelly? It's you? A voice sounded. I looked up and, to my surprise, saw the older Eric. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. He was friendly and full of energy, the way I remembered him. The elder Eric. I exclaimed. It's been a long time. How are you? And how is Ben? Eric asked, grinning. Under your care, I suppose. I heard that you had become co-authors of the business. I'm sorry I couldn't greet you earlier. I frowned, confused by his words. Co-author? I asked, looking at Eric with a puzzled expression. What do you mean? Ben told me you were his business partner. Eric looked at me in surprise. No, he replied. I just helped him with the design of the site at his request. That is all. Ben didn't mention anything about working together or that I'm a co-owner. My heart skipped a beat. Did he lie to me? But before I could digest what I had heard, Eric continued. Moreover, I heard that you were a sponsor. Ben mentioned that you supported him financially by covering the costs of the house. Eric's words were hitting my soul harder with every passing moment. It turned out that Ben rented another apartment, but from the very beginning he assigned others to do everything from inventory management to delivery, and he only followed the advertising campaigns. Ben's recent frequent requests for financial support now seemed clearer to me. His funds were probably really running out. The fact that he didn't tell me about the inheritance increasingly confirmed that there were deeper problems behind his silence. The elder Eric's words shed light on many things, and in my thoughts doubts gradually turned into understanding. I stood up calmly, thanked him for his frankness, and, feeling strangely relieved, left the cafe. When I came to my senses, my feet led me to my parents' house. As if by instinct, I was looking for comfort and support. When my father saw me with the suitcases, he looked surprised, and the tears that I had been holding back all this time suddenly gushed out. I was silent, looking at their faces, the faces of people who were always there, and finally broke down. Tell us what happened, my father asked softly. Your mother and I are always on your side. Yes, dear, Mom added, putting her hand on my shoulder. You're trying too hard for everyone, but yourself. Their words, full of tenderness and understanding, broke through all internal barriers, and I burst into tears. I told them about everything, about life with my mother-in-law, about the unbearable humiliation, about the financial burden that I alone carry on my shoulders, trying to support the family, while Ben stayed away. With every word, my soul became lighter, but I deliberately kept silent about the most terrible thing, about how my mother-in-law treated me, about how she literally pushed me out of her house. My parents were already outraged by my story. There is no need to return to this house, my father said firmly, and his words seemed to penetrate deep into my heart. From now on, live for yourself. You deserve better. After this conversation, I felt like the huge weight that had been weighing on me for all these months finally eased. For the first time in a long time, I felt lightness and freedom. The only message from Ben that day was a short one. Where are you now? I didn't answer. This was followed by several more messages in the same vein, but after ignoring them, I realized that his attempts to contact me soon stopped. My absence seemed to be nothing more than a minor inconvenience to him. Instead of bitterness, I felt a growing determination. Over lunch with my parents, I once again felt the real family warmth that I had lost a long time ago. Maybe all I was looking for was in these simple moments of happiness that I had been missing for so long. While living with my parents, I gradually began to return to myself. The days passed steadily, and every day I became more and more aware that my former world was artificially created, filled with lies and illusions that I imposed on myself. About 2 weeks after I left, Ben called. His voice was flat as always, without much emotion, as if he didn't even understand what had happened. "Kelly, how are you? Has everything calmed down with Mom? She feels bad about all this. Will you be back soon?" I took a deep breath, trying to speak calmly. "I'm at my parents' house right now. I decided to stay here. Your mother said she was tired of taking care of poor people like me and kicked me out. I'm not going back. We should get a divorce." "Wait, why the divorce?" His voice suddenly became more insistent. "If my mom is the problem, we can just move out. I'll come get you, we'll talk it over." "Ben," I interrupted, barely able to contain my irritation, "you didn't even try to talk to me when I was around. As soon as I left, did you decide what to discuss? All you care about is the rent, which I can no longer pay for both of you. You didn't even ask how I was doing." After my words, there was silence, which he could not immediately break. "Actually," he finally spoke, "I'm just asking for advice from business consultants. We may have a big project coming up soon. I just want you to give me some time. We can find a new place to live, everything will be different." "Don't change the subject," I interrupted. "You still haven't told me anything important. I don't want to waste my time on empty promises anymore. I'll prepare the divorce papers and send them to you." I hung up the phone, feeling my heart lighten. But that night, Ben suddenly appeared on my parents' doorstep. Through the crack in the door, through the chain, I heard his familiar voice. "Kelly, please don't get mad. Let's go back and talk. Mom feels bad about it. You know she's not angry." I replied with restraint. "Ben, your mother kicked me out. Don't take it seriously." "Are you serious? Your mother burned me with a hair iron. I'm not going back to a house where I can be so humiliated and abused." His frivolous words about a simple fight caused a wave of anger in me, as if someone had thrown oil into a flame. My determination to decide on a divorce without a face-to-face meeting was unshakable, but the resentment boiling inside was too strong to just brush it off. I felt angry at both my husband and my mother-in-law. They became the embodiment of all those resentments and disappointments that I had been saving up for many months. I wanted to blame them for everything that had accumulated in my heart, but the fire inside continued to burn. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "It's time for you to go home too. I'll contact you tomorrow. Will you really get in touch?" His voice sounded pleading, though there was a lack of understanding in it. "I can't accept a divorce without discussing it. If you don't get in touch, I'll come back tomorrow." After saying that, Ben left, leaving me with mixed feelings. I knew that the meeting was inevitable, and I decided that I needed to put all the dots over the I. I made an appointment 3 days later, inviting Ben and his mother to a cafe restaurant on the 30th floor of a luxury hotel. This choice of location was not accidental. I wanted to show that I would no longer adapt to their conditions. That day, I carefully thought out my appearance. I was wearing an elegant dress that accentuated my neck. I put my hair so that the burn scar was clearly visible. I wanted them both to see that I was no longer who they thought I was. When I entered the hall, my mother-in-law met me with a displeased look. Her annoyance was obvious, but I answered her with a calm smile. "Thank you for coming," I began softly. "I've reserved a table for afternoon tea. I hope you enjoy it." Ben seemed relieved by my calm tone, although he remained tense. We sat down at the table, and soon we were served tea with light snacks. But before I could take the first spoonful, my mother-in-law started talking. "Kelly, I'm truly sorry about what happened last time. I was wrong. Ben scolded me for this, and I realized that I went too far. You'll forgive me, won't you?" I didn't answer right away. She took a small pie in her hand, took a slow bite, enjoying its taste, and only then turned her neck so that the scar was visible even more clearly. I can only forgive you when this scar disappears, I said coldly, feeling her smile slip from her face. At that moment, I noticed how nervous Ben was. His mother-in-law looked at him in disbelief. What are you talking about? He said he was busy every day, that he was working, that he's a decent businessman. I watched with satisfaction as Ben began to turn pale under her gaze, clearly trying to find the right words. Wait a minute, Ben panicked visibly. It's a misunderstanding, Mom. I'm working on my project. A project? I repeated with a touch of sarcasm. You seem to have left your old business. The elder Eric told me about it. So what have you been doing lately? Ben turned even paler, and his mother, no longer hiding her irritation, grabbed his arm tightly. What's going on, Ben? You said you had everything under control. You can't just walk away. What are you going to do? You said you were building a business. Ben looked around helplessly, as if trying to find a way out of this conversation, but he was getting more and more confused in his words. I looked at this scene with inner satisfaction. His attempts to justify himself seemed pathetic. At that moment, a serving stand with great-looking sweets was brought to our table. I easily took one of them and calmly continued to watch as Ben tried in vain to keep the situation under control, and his mother began to realize the depth of the problems. Have you used up all your inheritance? Her voice was full of suspicion and anger. Explain yourself, Ben. Yes, I said, not giving him time to get out. He spent all the inheritance left by your husband. Your family's financial stability disappeared precisely because of him. What? My mother-in-law abruptly leaned back on the sofa, shocked by my words. Her face turned pale, and tears glistened in her eyes. Are you serious, Ben? His attempts to say something were drowned in silence, in which only the sound of my quiet laughter could be heard. I continued to speak calmly, carefully hiding my true emotions, as if I did not know the whole picture, which had long been revealed to me. Mary, I began with a cold smile, turning to my mother. In fact, I covered all the expenses for your house. Even the allowance you thought Ben was giving you came from my wallet. In addition to this, I paid for his accommodation, all his business ventures while he was inactive, posing as an entrepreneur. Mary froze in shock, her eyes widening as she digested what she had heard. No way. How is that possible? She gasped. She turned to Ben, waiting for some explanation from him. Ben, as if in complete despair, was still trying to convince her otherwise. Don't worry, Mom, he said nervously, we can handle Kelly's income. It's not as bad as it seems. But his words sounded pathetic, like an empty confidence that no one believed in anymore. Ben's real intentions were revealed to us, and I stifled a laugh as I watched him lose ground. Don't joke, Ben, I replied, not even giving him a chance to justify himself. You know perfectly well that we are already at the bottom. You're just wasting time and money on empty games. The cafe fell into a heavy, tense silence. Ben, feeling that his lies were no longer working, tried to say something, but his words were pathetic. I finished my tea in one gulp, folded my hands and said, I can't take care of you two anymore, who are obviously in complete financial ruin. You will have to pay the rent yourself next week. And as for the divorce, we will continue everything firmly through lawyers. I slowly got up from the table, pulling the divorce papers out of my bag and placing them in front of Ben. His eyes filled with tears. I don't want a divorce, he whispered. Please don't do this, Kelly. But I've already made my decision, and nothing could change it. Mary, pale from what she had heard, reached for the documents with trembling hands. Kelly. Wait, her voice broke into a whisper. I'm really sorry. I didn't know that we couldn't survive without you. Help us. We are family, after all. The word family that sounded at that moment echoed in the emptiness of my feelings for them. It used to mean more to me, but now everything has changed. Family? I asked with a slight sarcasm in my voice. You said you'd never accept me into your family, didn't you, Mary? Mary covered her face with her hands, not knowing what to say, and I continued. And as compensation for the burn, I would like you to start with the payments in this case. I hope you still have the allowance I gave you. I left them at the hotel without saying anything else. Ben, lost and broken, was silent, staring into space, and Mary could not hide the despair that was reflected on her face. As I left, I looked at the majestic high-rise buildings that could be seen from the cafe window, and for a moment I wondered, did they feel the fall from heaven to earth the same way I did when it all started? This was the culmination of my revenge. The divorce took place, although Ben resisted at first, clinging to the remnants of our relationship. But when I threatened to file a police report against his mother for mutilation, he quickly gave up. I knew I couldn't forgive her. But her disappearance from my life was the only gift that erased her from my memory. The main thing was that they were no longer a part of my life, and that was enough for me. Later, I demanded significant compensation from Ben for moral damage. According to the rumors, he and his mother moved into a tiny apartment. Their relationship escalated, the tension between Mary, whose arrogance gave way to humility, and Ben, who remained in debt, was clearly growing. Mary, as they say, now moonlights as a cleaner to somehow make ends meet. I couldn't help but laugh at the thought of the scene. The once arrogant woman who despised me was now forced to come to terms with reality. Ben didn't escape the difficulties either. He worked several jobs at the same time to pay off his debts. He even worked at night, and it seemed to be more suitable for his impulsive nature. I once thought his activity was attractive, but over time I realized that there was only superficial stupidity behind it. Everything that seemed attractive to me turned out to be just an illusion, shattered into dust. He was far from the successful entrepreneur he pretended to be. Now I lived in my parents' house, worked remotely, focusing all my attention on my career. Meeting with the elder Eric only strengthened my confidence. I gave him all the details of what happened, and he highly appreciated my writing skills, suggesting new projects. I took it as a sign that my life was moving forward. From that moment on, I decided to focus on myself and live for my goals.